Welcome to the covenant with Abraham. We looked at the covenant with Noah over the past 2 weeks, and we saw that in the covenant with Noah and the story of Noah, that God's judgment is real. His judgment is real against sin. But God sets aside his judgment, sets aside the destruction of humanity because of our sin, so that salvation, his reconciliation, his bringing everything back into right relationship with himself can take place. So in the story of Noah, the covenant with Noah, God has established a runway, a path on which salvation can take place. And here in the covenant with Abraham that we're going to dig into today, we see God furthering that setting up of salvation, that he's not just going to do it without letting us know that he's doing it. He's going to walk us up to it. And so that's what we get in this covenant with Abraham. You know, a few weeks ago, or in December at some point, my wife was telling me one night late, hey, there's a meteor shower tonight. Let's go outside and look at it. And she was all excited. And so we were standing on our deck trying to find the meteors, and she sees a few, and of course I don't see any, but it is breathtaking to see the stars in the sky, even in town. But when you get further out and you look up and you see the expanse of the sky and the stars that are laid out in it, it really is breathtaking. And here in the covenant with Abraham, we see God making some pretty significant promises, and one to Abraham that the number of people in his family will outnumber the stars in the sky. And that's mind-blowing to us. But here in this covenant, in these promises, we see God's faithfulness, his graciousness, and his pathway to salvation being furthered. So let's dig in together as we just look at this. I just want to look at the first passage that we were going to read together, just to establish what are these promises. How does God establish this promise to Abraham? And then what implications does that have to us today? So here in Genesis chapter 12, starting in verse 1, we see this. Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make you a great nation. And I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. And I will bless those that curse you, and I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you, Abraham, all of the families of the earth shall be blessed. So Abram went as the Lord told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Abram took Sarai, his wife, and Lot, his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out to go to the land of Canaan. And when they came to the land of Canaan, Abraham passed through the land to the place at Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. At that time the Canaanites were in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abraham and said, to your offspring I will give this land. And so he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he moved to the hill country on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. And Abraham journeyed on, still going toward the Negeb. In this passage, we see the three promises of God to Abraham played out. And they get furthered as in the other readings, but here we see them really specifically and really clearly. In verse 2, I will make you a great nation. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. In this promises, God tells Abraham, hey, you and your family is going to be established as a great nation. Not just a blip on the radar of history, but one that throughout history, throughout time, is great and is a blessing to the world. And we see that further fleshed out as he says, I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you, Abraham, in your great nation, all of the families of the earth shall be blessed. And then further down, God establishes the promise of land, a promised land for the people of Abraham's family. These three promises point us towards salvation, that God will gather his people into a great nation together, that he will bless the whole earth through this family, and that the land promised to Abraham will be fulfilled in the person of Jesus Christ. In chapter 15, we see this promise reaffirmed to Abraham, where God reaffirms the promises and even doubles down on the promises to him. If you've read this section this week, you get to this part where they cut up a bunch of animals, and then these two things kind of fly up and down between these animals. And it's very confusing and very strange, but let me just try and clarify it a little bit for us. In ancient times, when kings would come together or nations would come together and form a covenant or a treaty with one another, what would happen to kind of seal that treaty or make an oath of that treaty or that covenant to one another, that the kings would sacrifice some animals, and they would lay out the sacrificed animals and create like a pathway. And then usually the king of lower value, the one who is not as strong, whose kingdom is not as big, who is the weaker of the two kings, would walk between these cut up animals, and as a way of saying, hey, the promise or the covenant that I just made with this other king, if I don't uphold my end of that covenant, let it be to me the same as it's been to these animals. Let me be killed. Let me be sacrificed if I don't uphold my end of the covenant. And here we see this picture of Abraham laying down, sacrificing these animals, these things being laid down in front of him. And then a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch pass between these pieces. And these two things represent God. A flaming fire pot, or a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch. And the Lord makes the covenant to Abraham again. I will give you this land. He reiterates his promises that he's made to Abraham. He reaffirms the promises. And in his going back and forth between these sacrificial animals, he's not saying, Abraham, you have to uphold your end of the bargain. God is saying, my promise is so strong that I am going to uphold my end of the covenant in such a way that if I don't, let it be to me the same way as these animals. Let me be sacrificed. Let me be killed. And we know that that's not God's nature to not keep his promises. And so God can make these promises fully knowing that he will uphold his end of the covenant promises to Abraham. God, the greater king, walks through these sacrifices, sealing this covenant in his own oath. And finally, we get to this idea of the sign of the covenant with Abraham. Just like Noah had the sign of the rainbow, God's judgment set aside for a time so that salvation can take place. Here we get a sign of God creating a nation of people through circumcision as their physical sign that they belong to this family. That in this family, in this nation, God will make a way for salvation to happen. Circumcision does two things. It shows dedication to God, and it shows a desire to follow him, and it shows obedience towards God and towards these blessings. When one is obedient towards God in this covenant, blessings come upon him. And when people turn away, those blessings fall away. And we we see this kind of idea where this covenant with Abraham might be conditional. It might be, hey, Abraham, you have to go get circumcised. You have to walk these things out in a specific way in order for the covenant to happen, for these 3 promises to happen to you. And God, in his great graciousness, knows that humanity will not be able to uphold their end of the bargain. And so he seals his oath. He seals the covenant with his oath and says, I will make these things happen no matter what happens. It's God who will ultimately keep his end of the covenant. And he does this for us. He does this for Israel. He does this for us in the person of Jesus. From Abraham's seed, from Abraham's family, Jesus comes. You want to talk about a great nation being established in the person of Jesus? That is the promise coming to fulfillment. The promise of land for the people of Abraham's family is fully realized in the second coming of Jesus Christ, where all of those who've placed their faith in him are met up with him and dwell with him for all of eternity. And then the promise of blessing for the whole earth is fulfilled in Christ because we need it. Our sin has separated us from God. And God, in his graciousness, has made a way for that salvation to happen. And he does so through the family of Abraham. And the family of Abraham blesses the whole earth is because salvation has come for all. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody on earth is just going to be a part of this blessing, that they're all going to get it poured out on them. No. If our faith or our trust or a desire to follow God is there, our faith, our belief in what Jesus Christ has done for us, then that blessing of salvation is poured out on us. And it's ours. God created a path to salvation through the covenant with Noah, and now is making the promise of salvation known through the covenant with Abraham. The path of salvation is there. The promise of salvation comes through Abraham and his family. Take time to read these passages in Genesis out loud as a group today, and then talk through them. What stood out? What was new to you? What did God reveal to you in your reading this week? Do you see Jesus in this covenant, and where and how do you see him? And then just dig into it. Take time to pray together, and then go and dig into the questions and dig deeper into this text, into what God has to say to us through the covenant with Abraham. Thank you so much. Go, read, pray together.